Yes, sorry about that. David went on to defeat the Philistines, and then he went on to become king. And he wasn't perfect, but he fulfilled his purpose. He was a great worshiper, and he fulfilled his purpose. And when we look at everyday life, we think about who can we relate to, or what can we relate to as simple people that fulfill purpose. And something that I'm going to put something relevant for every age group. So, in the Trinidad context, we look at the Black Power movement in 1970 and what started that. And I mean, it started way before because the civil rights movement was something that was going on. Malcolm X died in 1965, Trinidad gained independence in 1962. But why did Black Power happen in Trinidad and Tobago? Black Power happened because, and even in 1965, there was this Industrial Stabilization Act that was signed and passed, and it would end up being very draconian, and it was not in the best interest of workers. In 1970, 8 years after Trinidad and Tobago's independence, we saw that only 4% of businesses were owned by people of African descent. And 53% of business was owned by people of white descent, or Caucasian descent. So there was still a lot of inequity. You found places like banks did not hire black people to work in the banks, and there were a lot of other places of prominence that did not employ black people. Black people only were supposed to work in certain type of jobs. And when I say black people, I also mean mainly people of African descent. But in some instances, it also extended. In many instances, it also extended to persons of East Indian descent. And when we look at that, we see that there was also a movement, or not a movement, but protests in Canada where some Trinidadian students were being on trial in Canada. And we also know about the entire movement in civil rights, where we have Stokely Carmichael, who went on to become Kwame Ture, and he was like one of the godfathers of the Pan-African movement, and he helped Ghana find their independence. We have people like Marcus Garvey, that was like the founder of Pan-African movement, and so on, from back in the day. So it was a build up. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. But this 1970 Black Power movement, this was really and truly instigated by young people. And, so many times we look at young people and we think that they don't have something in them to evoke change. And we saw recently, earlier this year, what the killings of George Floyd caused in the US. It was a lot of young people that came out and marched against the injustices that happened against Black Americans in the US. And it is to show that it doesn't matter what your age is, you can evoke change. Because like in 1970 and the Black Power movement, change happened. So not only did you give us free education, which came with independence, but we also had to realize that education is one thing, but the real thing is being able to exist in a society and fulfill the potential that God has for us in the society. And we can't do that if it is that these systems exist that continue to oppress people from achieving their potential. And we have to realize that in each and every one of us, God has put purpose and he has given us our destiny. And not because we live in a society, or we live in society where a lot of things wrong or perceptions of us are not positive, it means that we have to just sit back and accept it for what it is. Sometimes you have to go and realize that, listen, God has put you here. In Psalm 139, he talks about God knowing you before he shaped you in his mother's womb, and he knew you from before inception, and he has a purpose for you. So when you realize that you serve a God that makes no mistakes, you have to be able to ask God to show you what your intention is for this journey in life, and fulfill it. So another example we use from the Bible. So we use a real life example. We use David, and we use another one from the Bible. So everybody knows about Gideon, right? He was that we saw the story of Gideon in Judges 6. And when they approached him to lead his people against the Midianites, right? He was like, well, hear this, right? It's kind of like in Lord of the Rings when you had like those tiny people. Anyway, let me not go off track. But it's like you're being the least of the least, you know, and you're like the weakest, the probably the shortest, you know, and you're looking at yourself and you're thinking that, you know, I can't do anything with this tiny little size and go and attack those people and take over their land and take that's not for me. But the thing is, God works through people that you don't expect him to work through in order for things to happen. If it is that you look at people and you could always make an assumption, hey, yeah, God, go and use him to do this, and it's so predictable, how could God show up his greatness if he always have to use somebody that everybody else assume to be the person he's going to pick? How it is that God's going to show up and show that he is God? You know, sometimes he have to use people that don't fit the description because he needs to show that he is God. And he, like, how could you look at him and think that he is supreme if it is that you can't use him? If because they can't use somebody, that's unlikely. And this is an encouragement for you never to discredit your God-given potential. So one thing that as a young person or as even an older person that you need to remember is we must never do things so that we don't achieve our God-given potential. Always don't let your insecurities eat you away and keep you from achieving your God-given potential, right? You will find that like with Saul had so many insecurities. You know, God ended up doing? God took his spirit away from him and he was never able to fulfill his purpose. And we don't want that. God has to take his spirit away from us because of our insecurities or because of how we